Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Julie Marchbanks from Public Strategies and I will be the host for today. Before we get started, I want to review a couple of housekeeping items with you and explain how you can participate in today's Zoom session. We invite you to use the chat box to ask a question, make a comment, or to address any technical issues. Please be sure to select the drop-down, Everyone, so that the moderator can read your question out loud. If you do not see the chat box located in the panels on your screen, please select the chat icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. The controls will auto-hide, so you may have to mouse over the bottom of your screen to display your meeting control toolbar. The polling feature will be used during today's training. You will be prompted to answer the poll. If you do not see the poll, you will need to enable pop-ups in your application settings or change your Zoom video layout. Video layout options are located in the top right corner of your screen. This presentation will be recorded. Recordings, presentations, and handouts will be available on the Exchange about 1 week after the topical training has concluded. At this time, I would love to welcome our moderator, Mary Ann Mozak, President and CEO of Ascend.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to day 2 and to track 1. You are in the session entitled Curriculum Fidelity and Strategies for Ensuring Successful Transfer of Skills. And I am confident that you're going to learn a lot of good information by two very, very knowledgeable women. And I'd like to introduce them. First of all, Dr. Connie Huber is the project manager at Public Strategies for SRAE training and technical assistance. Dr. Huber has a master's in public health and a doctorate in education leadership. Accompanying her is Dr. Lynette Tanis, and she is the author of Educating Incarcerated Youth. Dr. Tanis is on the faculty at Harvard University, where she teaches a course that she has designed. So welcome to both of you, and why don't we just dive in to this session. Before we do that, can I just bring to your attention, we love your feedback. So at the end of the day, please be sure to tell us what you have thought of each of the sessions that you're experiencing. So, ladies, all yours.
Well, we're going to talk about increasing engagement and learning while maintaining the fidelity to curriculum. So why this session? To learn to develop powerful lessons that are not just informational, but transformational, and to develop powerful lessons that maintain the fidelity of the what without making changes to that content. To develop powerful lessons that increase the learner engagement, that motivationally and behaviorally engage the learner in an effective learning process.
Awesome, thank you, Connie. And we have actually 6 objectives for this, which one might think that that's quite a bit. So we're trying to get a lot of information to you all, but just overall, we hope that by the end of this session, you'll be able to explain the difference between curriculum design and instructional design, and actually have an understanding of sort of why this matters, that you'll be able to assess an activity's learning level and better understand how to guide the participants or students in order to increase their learning. And additionally, that you'll be able to enhance your impact in terms of the communication that you provide, that you'll be able to further provide quality lessons without changing the core curriculum. There are components that Connie especially will focus on that highlights that, so that there is no real change to the intended method of delivery, and that you'll be able to deliver your curriculum content at an appropriate level for your learners in order to improve clarity and also just engagement overall. So in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, this might be something that you all are familiar with. This is going to be a main focus for us today. So we just wanted to make sure that everyone is sort of on the same page and understanding for this. Bloom's taxonomy is a classification system used to define and distinguish different levels of human cognition, so the thinking and learning. It is with this process that we believe you'll be able to maintain fidelity while you're implementing the curriculum.
So just quickly in the chat box, how many of you have heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Just answer yes or no very quickly. And Marianne, if you could help me kind of monitor how many folks have heard of that. I would say that if you were in yesterday's session on behavioral predictors, you heard about Bloom's taxonomy in terms of cognition. In looking at this,
we have a lot of yeses, Connie. We have one that says they
Awesome.
heard about it yesterday.
Great. I love it that somebody classified it as yesterday. We might have a teacher with us, Lynette, that can contribute robustly in the chat box, and I would encourage you to do that. Also to ask questions there. We'll save substantive questions to the end, but if you have a quick question, drop that in the chat box and we'll try to monitor that. Bloom's taxonomy was developed by a group of psychologists led by Benjamin Bloom, hence the name Bloom's. We think of budding learners as blooming, but that's not why it was called Bloom's taxonomy. It was Benjamin Bloom. It's about what one is doing to create a system to define and distinguish the different levels of a participant's thinking and learning. Taxonomy is something you use all the time. For example, animals are classified as mammals, birds, amphibians, etc. Some of you might actually use taxonomy in your closet, like organizing your shoes by colors, style, that sort of thing. So taxonomy is something we're familiar with. You have a handout. It looks like this slide, and the questions listed here on each level can easily be used to gauge the level of learning of the student. You can use these in your work to move the bar on the Likert scale of learning.
Awesome. Thank you, Connie. And so also along those lines, we have 7 definitions that we want to share with you today. Again, just trying to make sure that to the extent possible, we can all be on the same page and have the shared understanding of these terms that you'll be hearing. So the first one is fidelity. It's something I actually used earlier. It's just faithfulness to the program delivery, such as your goals or curriculum. The next is facilitation. So that may happen by someone or something that paves the way for learning. The third term is assessment. So being able to actually assess or evaluate the learner's sort of understanding how they've been able to grasp the concept or content. Additionally, the next is instructional design. So it's sort of combining the art of creating learning experiences with the science of how the brain works. The fifth term is curriculum design. And so organizing what you want the participants to learn and the order that the content and subjects are presented in order to further promote learning. Pedagogy is to promote learning through well thought out strategies and techniques. And then lastly, assessment. This was also mentioned earlier, making certain that the level of learning is in sync with the activity.
You know, one of the most important things that a presenter can do is to provide definitions to make sure that folks are on the same page. And as you can see, we had assessment listed there twice with 2 separate definitions. So it's really important that when you're engaging with a learning or with an audience that you're providing those definitions so that folks understand the terms and that we're all on the same page. We also provided those for your future study. If you choose to do additional work around this topic, you'll have terms to research. All right, the very act of comprehension involves one's knowledge of the world. So let's take a look at a theory that aims to explain the attainment of knowledge. Schema theory was first made popular by Jean Piaget. Sophisticated, right? Schema theory is not so sophisticated. It really describes how knowledge is acquired, processed, and organized. There are categories of knowledge that help us interpret and understand the world around us. According to this theory, knowledge is a network of mental framework or cognitive constructs called schema.
Yeah, and more simply stated, it's like the building blocks of learning.
And an example of that, Lynette, you can kind of help me out with this, is a child may have a schema about a type of animal, such as a cat. That may include it's small, it's furry, it has a long tail. So Lynette, what might happen if a child with a schema for a cat encounters a squirrel?
They would more than likely think that the squirrel is a cat.
Yeah, so they'd say, oh, cat, oh, kitty, when they see a squirrel. So the child's gonna need an explanation. The child will take in this new information, modifying the previous existing schema to include the new information. But what if a child does not have a cat, or a schema for any animal for that matter? They haven't seen a cat, they don't have a cat. This is important in SRAE because the A through F within the FOA and the other grant requirements encompass concepts that maybe some youth don't have a schema for. These constructs will need to be built for them, just like this example. Some youth may not have a schema for marriage or healthy relationships, and these concepts are going to need to be defined for the youth to help them develop an understanding.
Yeah, I mean, and as experiences happen, this new information is used to modify or change previously existing schema, which we'll talk about this a little further on when we get into how we activate sort of background knowledge or prior knowledge for the students.
This is also why it's imperative for SRAE programs to take a trauma-informed approach. And Lynette, that is a teaser for a later training that you and I are going to give. This is not only useful for understanding and learning in general, but it can be applied quite usefully to survivors of trauma, to think about those youth actually have a construct or a framework that exists based on their past experiences, and the knowledge that they have of the world is based in that framework. So very helpful information. All right, let's bring these concepts together and begin to apply a little bit of knowledge.
Well, you just mentioned apply, so I see we are moving up, officially up the ladder of Bloom's taxonomy, up the hierarchy. Thanks, Connie.
So if you're watching and following along with the handout, you see we started out with definitions, and we're going to move a little bit into application, which is how teachers really frame the curriculum and the lessons they're building. One lesson is building on the next as we're moving learners up the hierarchy of learning. So let's take a look at curriculum. Curriculum is considered the what. Most of you are very familiar with this. You've either completed or will complete curriculum training. Taking into consider schema theory and Bloom's and varying levels of learning, you might agree that there's a need to tailor the curriculum and the activities to the individual learner, because the individual learner could be anywhere on that hierarchy. So it's not just enough to take a look at what's in the curriculum, but also to look at the individual learner. So this is a practice that classroom teachers use very skillfully in crafting their delivery for maximum impact. Before I talk about this example in instructional design, I would also say another reason that this presentation could have power for your program. It's not just in talking about the individual learner, but also looking at your program. And if you think about developing instructional design and lesson plans, as Lynette's going to talk about in just a few minutes, is that can be very powerful when your program is building partnerships with schools. Lynette was a principal for a number of years, so she could really attest to the fact when she gets to lesson plans how valuable it could be to present well thought out lesson plans with well-crafted instructional design, or what we refer to as the how. So let's think about this. A classroom teacher is teaching math. She's handed a book, or he, and is told, you're teaching this math class. So you open up a math textbook. If you're like me, I open up a math textbook. Whew, I like science, but not so much math. You open it up and it's like, oh, here are some learning objectives and here are some practice problems in the back of the book. That's all the curriculum design. But as a teacher, what are some of the ways that that curriculum could be delivered? And maybe you could put some ideas in the chat box about how math curriculum could be delivered. Some of the ways that I thought of are manipulative, teaching the concepts through manipulative. Problems could be worked out on the board by the students. A video could be used. The possibilities are endless. We call that instructional design, or the how that's going to be delivered. It's intentionally targeting and addressing those behavior predictors that you talked about previously. Those can be included in the instructional design as you're targeting the message, thinking about how you're going to deliver that, not just what's involved in the curriculum.
We have folks saying that board games and using games could help with that, teaching math, to that question.
Awesome.
Excellent. I think math should always be gamified. Let's make it fun, because by nature it's not fun. And as a teacher, finding ways to engage those that have math anxiety, that's a great way to do it. And you'll see that our slides look a little bit like a game, because a board game, because we know that gamifying things does draw attention. That would definitely have appeal. So let's think about this for a minute. The object is not only to engage the learner, but also to move the learner down the road and up the hill to the highest level of learning, so they can evaluate the information and ultimately use it to make decisions and to maintain or change behaviors that will assist them in avoiding risk, all the while maintaining the fidelity of the curriculum and the established program goals. Let's take a look at the three parts of design. There's appeal. Curriculum has to have appeal, such as cultural relevance, age appropriateness. Instructional design has the same need for appeal, such as facilitator with-itness or relevantness, the concepts, the existing knowledge, and learning styles. All of those things have to be taken into account to create appeal, not just within the curriculum, but also with the instructional design. And a game certainly would be an appealing way for a learner that enjoyed that.
Yeah, and in addition to that, like, effective communication is important, but it's just one aspect.
So we can practice our communication skills and become very dynamic, but there's a little bit more to it than just that. If it's not relevant, if it's not age appropriate, those things need to be taken into consider as well. Efficiency also needs to be considered. We would say that efficiency is the interaction of the learner with the content through a dynamic presentation, but it must include assessing the level of learning to extend the learner's thinking, or not just to extend it, but maybe to remediate it or move it backward by defining things so that we can increase the learning. If they're already getting it, then we can extend it. But we always want to be moving in the direction that the student needs in order to bring them to that highest level of learning. So we may need to come back down before we go forward. So use the questions like the ones that are found on the handout to assess and to decide which way you need to go. This will allow intentional adaptations to increase learning while maintaining fidelity to the curriculum.
Awesome. Yeah, and this is something, just so you all know, we will examine further on in the presentation, so you'll have concrete examples of exactly what Connie's describing.
Okay, effectiveness is another thing to consider. It's the delivery that moves the learner up the levels of learning. So we're not just giving them information, but it moves from informational to transformational, where we can actually create decision-making ability or a change. We're transforming the lives of the youth. Okay, curriculum design and instructional design work together to move the student down the road and up the hill, if we would say that, in the order of learning to decision-making. So on the left, we have curriculum design. That's the what. That's made up of learning objectives, lessons, and outcomes. On the right, we see instructional design, the how. includes methods of instruction, learning environment, and green light adaptations, such as including definitions, if necessary, to increase the learning. And these two go side by side to help move the learner down the road. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of those in just a minute, what that looks like in the classroom. One of the reasons that you need to add an intentional focus of instructional design into your programming is it offers an opportunity to design the instruction in such cases as these. And I'm sure that some of you could indicate in the chat box that you've encountered these. Maybe you would type very quickly one of these that you have actually encountered. A need for an instructional design might be, anybody ever had 60 minutes of curriculum and 45 minutes of class? Like a fire drill or any number of things that could go on in the school, and you thought you had 60 minutes, you had 45 minutes, or like this presentation where we have 3 hours of content that we would present in a class and we're doing it in 60 minutes. So instructional design helps with that. Oh, this one's painful, Lynette. You walk into the classroom, you thought you were going to have a smart board, and you find a chalkboard. Good instructional design plan will account for that. What do I do if I get there? This has happened. I was in this room this week, and now I've been moved to another room for the next week, and how do I account for what might be in there? Or here's another thing that can happen, 50 students versus 10. Oh, hey, we have this group, we're going to move them in here. Is that okay with you? And so always creating an instructional design that allows for movement and fluidity of things that we all know can happen. Or what if the student lacks the foundational information to even engage with the lesson? Day one, the lesson is already at a space where they don't have the foundational information. What are some of the tools you can have in your toolbox to bring that learner along? Oh, here's a really relevant one. You're now using an online format when you did have a classroom setting. So the design of your instruction will be changed in order to accommodate that. Then, I love it, we talked about the behavioral predictors. If you're going to address those, you need to have a plan or a design to be able to tie your content to those predictors and ask those valuable questions to move them to behavior change. The lessons can be tailored to the above situations to maximize learning, which can lead to behavior change. It just takes some additional tools in the toolbox to adapt and to deliver that curriculum with fidelity, and that's what we're hoping, is to add a few tools to your toolbox.
Awesome. Thank you, Connie. There were lots of folks who was clear that what you were sharing was resonating with them, as they indicated yes, yes, and yes in the comment box as you were talking. All right, so just in terms of, we want to actually spend a moment to just think about, well, one, providing a poll for you, and kind of like when you think about facilitator characteristics or presenter characteristics as you're teaching these materials, you know, what's most important, the content and or the delivery? Perhaps both are important. You would perhaps agree to that. There's a poll that's coming up on the screen, and we ask that you take a look at the two questions and then respond yes or no. It's our understanding that, you know, yes, it's important to be a dynamic facilitator. That's an asset, but there also has to be sort of an equal focus on the actual learning that's taking place. So we're curious to kind of see, one, have you ever had an interesting and dynamic teacher, but maybe didn't learn anything in class? And then two, have you ever had a boring teacher, but you learned a lot? Wow.
We've still got quite a few people answering the poll, so we'll give it about another 30 seconds and we'll end the poll and share the results.
Marianne, that never ceases to amaze me that there can be a really boring teacher and learn a lot. I think you know a little bit about that, don't you?
I sure do. When I was a freshman in college many years ago, I had a very, very boring biology teacher. but I loved biology and I loved the content, but she came in every morning at 8 o'clock, which was just torturous for us all, and would just teach in a monotone voice. But I still remember learning so very much from her. So it's so true.
I had the opposite. I had an incredibly dynamic chemistry teacher. I don't recall the time of day that it was, but she was very attractive. She was very animated. We were high school girls. We wanted to be like her. She ran around the room, got up on chairs, and talked about molecules. I'm not quite sure what the concept was there. Later, I made the connection when I went to college and took a course. I thought, oh, molecules get excited and move around, but I didn't get that from her presentation, but I sure loved to watch her run around the chemistry lab talking about molecules. It was exciting, but I missed the point. How about you, Lynette?
Well, I'm really fascinated by this data, in the poll is that almost equally, 76% and then 73% has had an interesting or dynamic teacher, but didn't learn anything, but then also a boring teacher where they learned a lot. I think just even in terms of this session, of course, our hope for you all is that you are both dynamic, I guess, dynamic, and people feel, your participants, your students feel like they're getting a lot from you. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. I think will be helpful for you all to kind of reflect, just as Marianne and Connie did, of like, who was that teacher or facilitator in your life that just kind of turned things on for you? What was it about them in terms of their characteristics, in terms of how they moved in the classroom, in terms of how they delivered the content, and kind of go back to those days to see if you can then begin to sort of mirror some of those behaviors, so that if in fact your participants were voting, you would be in the dynamic, inspiring, and awesome content.
Yes, Lynette. I think one of the biggest things we wanted to get across here is having dynamic presentation skills are a great thing, and you should definitely have those, and being able to connect and having the with itness is important, but it's not always enough. You need to go a step further and try to understand how the learner learns. Look at those predictors and listen. How do we get them to behavior change? How can we adapt and increase learning? That's very critical. So dynamic presentation skills are wonderful, and those are great to have, and they're a great asset to learning and can actually bring that boring content alive. But it's also very important that you understand how they learn and that the goal is to increase learning. So as Lynette said, the full package, having them both, having the dynamic skills and having the ability to adapt those, very important. All right, so I don't know if we can move that poll down, because I'd love for you to be able to see this graphic. The graphic here really shows the relationship between the learner, the facilitator, and the content. And so, Lynette, can we get that moved? Or
Connie, you can just exit it out, or you can move it from your screen.
Yeah, just remove it from your screen.
Yeah, you can just put an X over it.
Hit the X.
All right, there we go. All right, so the car, we'll say that the car is the delivery, and the GPS is the content which tells us where we're going to go, such as learning objectives. The instructional design is the how, which is the route that we're going to take. And so the facilitator and the learner are the driver and the passenger. And so there's definitely a relationship as we move this learner down the road. And we see that the facilitator and the learner each have to be engaged in the learning. And then the facilitator and the content have the relationship of pedagogy and how that is going to be delivered. And then also a relevance. Is the facilitator relevant? Is the content relevant to the learner? There is this important overlapping relationship between the facilitator, the content, and the learner. So we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to be thinking about that as we are approaching that learner, that there's a dynamic relationship between each of these things.
And similar to the strands, Connie, that you shared earlier in terms of appeal, efficiency, and effectiveness, I mean, one is, again, the relevance of the content and the facilitator with itness, as you just shared. That's really important. In terms of efficiency, like maintaining fidelity to the content while also making the presentation dynamic, using effective communication and delivery, those are important pieces. And even the interaction of the learner with the content through that dynamic presentation further increases the level of learning. So that's really important. And then lastly, in terms of effectiveness, passing from informational to transformational, actually having robust interaction between the learner, the facilitator. Again, part of this is you have to demonstrate just naturally that you care about this population and what you're doing. That is huge in terms of building that relationship. So that's just really important, that needs to be highlighted. But in addition to that, like actually utilizing effective instructional design strategies or pedagogy, increasing the knowledge and transfer of skills, those are really important. That sort of like, in terms of the pedagogy, that pair and share component is going to be very important.
I would add to that too, Lynette, and this is something that we heard about yesterday, is also that relationship where the facilitator is interacting with the content. We heard yesterday that the facilitator needs to believe in the content in which they're delivering. And so that is another relationship that's there, is that the facilitator has to be engaged with the content, and pedagogy is the strategy by which, you know, they can show that they have that relationship with the content as well. So that's a dynamic relationship to explore further in your programming.
Awesome. Thank you, Connie. Yeah, and so this next piece is just kind of like the what. These are just sort of four main parts of curriculum design. So the main pieces are the objectives, the content, the learning experiences, and the evaluations. So the objectives are just kind of like what should be done, you know, kind of like our goals and objectives for this session. And as you think about that, the next is just what subject matter should be included. So thinking about the content piece. What experiences or activities should be a part of those. So in terms of the learning experiences, notice it's experiences. So like really focus on creating experiential sessions with the students or the learners. That's really important. And then lastly, in terms of the evaluation, basically what methods are you going to use to kind of judge the results of your lesson, of the curriculum, if they're able to actually apply those skills that they were taught. So those are sort of the four main pieces in terms of curriculum design. And now we just kind of want to share with you a sample lesson plan template for your, so that I'll share it, I'll kind of discuss it briefly, but there are multiple examples sort of out there in terms of lesson plan design. But as we were thinking about this session and thinking about the curriculum with which you will use, we felt like this kind of provides it in a succinct way. So one is just even the title, actually sharing the title and sort of like for students, if it is worded in just maybe a couple of words, thinking of even asking it, posing it as a question, just kind of also thinking about, you know, Buck Institute's project-based learning and like having a driving question or essential question, just kind of thinking about that in terms of your title, making it engaging. The objective, so again, like what do you intend for the learners to be able to accomplish or demonstrate mastery on by the end of your time together? And then this is a really important piece, like what's that opening? What's that hook? What are you gonna do to engage your participants? So kind of thinking about that in mind as you're planning your lessons is gonna help you, especially when, as Connie gave those different scenarios of you were expecting 10 and there's 50, or you were expecting a smart board, but you got a board that wasn't as smart. And so this can make sure you can at least walk into that room or area confident that, okay, they're gonna be engaged because, you know, whatever it is, I'm gonna show them this 2-minute video, or I'm gonna open up with this, and that's gonna be my way to engage the learners. So that's important. And then just in terms of like the facilitator activities, so what will you do to help the participants further understand the concepts? Again, we'll provide you with some examples of that shortly during the session. And then in terms of the learner activities, what do you expect the participants to do? What do you expect them to practice? Or how do you expect them to demonstrate their understanding of the concepts or skills taught? And this assessment, again, this word has come up several times in our presentation today. It's how will the participants demonstrate that they've mastered the concept that you've taught? So thinking about that assessment piece ahead of time. Again, some people have exit tickets or other things that just they are able to then demonstrate, yep, before I leave, here's my one sentence statement of what I learned today or how I intend to apply what I learned when I leave from here. And then lastly, probably almost equally important for this is your material. So actually identifying in advance what materials you'll need and putting that list together is also going to be very helpful.
All right, very good. Let's look at 2 ways to center instruction. This first one I would say is very centered around curriculum. So if you're not currently designing your instruction and you're not currently using lesson plans to add those hooks, you might be using something that's more subject-centered, meaning that the curriculum alone is driving what's happening within the time that you're with the student. So subject-centered focuses solely on the design outlined in the curriculum. The subject is at the center. The content is the center of the instruction. So it's anchored totally to the content. It's prescribed. It focuses on process and doesn't look at learning styles. Advantages are it focuses on the content and those goals. It can be easily standardized and it can be easily assessed in standardized tests.
Yeah, and Connie, I recall you actually used to teach courses for nursing students. Will you just provide maybe an example of when this was effective?
Sure. Nursing students, in educating nursing students, this is the approach that's necessary. How many of you, and you can answer in the chat box, how many of you would want to know that a nurse passed a standardized test for giving shots before he or she gave you one? So in nursing courses, we focus wholly on the content and achieving the skills that are needed to pass the NCLEX or the standardized nursing exam. The drawback to this type of instruction is that it doesn't take into account the various learning styles, the learning levels, environment, those sorts of things. So with nursing students, adapting the administering of a shot was not explored. Creativity in that way was not widely appreciated. So one way to do it, focused on the curriculum, that's how we're going to do it. So some of the challenges are there are loss of student engagement, loss of motivation. So we could all agree that focusing wholly on the content or the subject and ignoring the learner may not provide the best outcomes because it may eliminate some learners, which is exactly what happened in the nursing program. 100 students were accepted annually, and they ended up graduating less than 40. Those that couldn't meet that standard were eliminated. In SRAE, this is problematic. If we want to reach as many students as possible, we don't want to eliminate those that lack understanding. We want to have an approach that works to bring that learner in to engage with that content. Okay, so that moves us to the learner-centered instruction. The next slide, Lynette.
Yep.
The learner contributes to the vision, the value, the culture, the experience. The presentation given yesterday on behavior predictors is an example of this, how instruction can be focused on something other than the content. Many of you may have attended the session or will be attending the session that talks about managing energy and developing trust and engaging the students when that is waning. You're watching their energy level and it's waning, and so you do something to bring excitement and re-engage them or calm them down, whatever is necessary, because the learner is a part of the experience and the presentation can be given around that. So an example is that instruction can be focused on something other than content, and the fidelity of the content or the what is not changed, but the design of the instruction can be, the things that we use and move within that space to engage the learner. So listening to the participants is very important in order to understand and engage their level of learning.
Yeah, and I'll just touch on this briefly, Connie, as I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure that we do have time for questions and answers. But just in terms of this, for the learner population, you're looking at the demographics, the learning styles, level of learning, as Connie kind of alluded to the little teaser earlier in her comments, tomorrow's session on trauma-sensitive youth and working with trauma-sensitive youth. We hope to definitely share with you some additional strategies there. The inquiry piece is asking questions, but also making sure that there's a reflection component and there's some interaction with that. And when you think about the learner in terms of learning theory and models, again, Bloom's is one that's a behaviorist model, but there are others like cognitive or informational processing as well, social learning. So those are the components there. And then lastly, in terms of collaboration, it's basically like working in groups, and then capacity building. You know, this is actually this next piece that we'll get into, where you as a facilitator will contribute to and provide scaffolding for your learners in order to meet those objectives.
Right. So what if the learner is not getting it? That capacity building or scaffolding that Lynette just talked about. So in scaffolding, it's a critical teaching strategy that can support students who are struggling with a concept. The scaffold is something a teacher can use to support the student so they can achieve the learning goals and avoid content deficiencies. So instructional scaffolding is a process which the teacher adds a support in order to enhance the learning and to aid the mastery of skills. And in just a minute, we're going to move into a lesson where we're going to talk about how we can create some scaffolding there, some tools and resources to help. The teacher or the parent does this systematically, building on the student's experience and knowledge or their schema as they're learning new skills. So one example would be a child who's learning to ride a bike, and the parent puts training wheels on the bike and holds on to the bike and runs alongside for support. Eventually, the training wheels are removed, the parent lets go, and the child is riding the bike all on their own. They've mastered the skill, and a new behavior is achieved or skill is acquired. Scaffolding is a term used to describe the method of teaching that involves providing resources and support to students as they learn new concepts. This helps build their self-efficacy. As the students develop skills in areas, the supports can be removed slowly. This is a critical element in teaching and learning new skills. The facilitator should closely observe youth and develop and adapt accordingly. This is just another strategy to consider and to be watchful, also to look for triggers and reactions and to discover opportunities for support. Scaffolds can be removed and placed back in as needed until the skill is performed independently or the behavior, the desired behavior, is being performed. So examples could be in programming, peer mentoring, after-school programs, and partners who can provide support to youth as they need it.
Awesome, thank you, Connie. And so we're just going to actually just do a quick assessment and just ask you, just at this time, if you can just put in the chat, you know, please define instructional design in one short sentence, or please describe or define curriculum design in one short sentence. So again, assessment has definitely been a word of the day for our session, but we just want you just to, again, there's no grading here, but just from your understanding, what would be a short way that you would define instructional design, and then also just a sort of a one sentence of how you would define curriculum design. And so as you're putting that in the chat, we will also continue on.
Let's just move it for a minute from define to apply. I think we have some learners out there that can apply it. So let's just, in the chat box, and we're going to move on quickly so you can continue to do that, is give a one-word strategy, tool, or medium that you can include in instructional design, not destruction, instructional design. What's one tool you can use? And
Awesome.
while you're doing that, move on to the example. Putting it all together, we're going to do that very quickly. In putting it all together, you're going to assess the student's learning by asking those appropriate questions that are focused around the handout. And this is what putting it all together looks like. Understand the learning, design the instruction by planning lesson plans, deliver the instruction, then assess the learner's understanding, then revise and repeat the cycle. So this is not a one and done. You're constantly assessing the learning, designing the instruction, delivering the instruction, and starting all over again as you continue that cycle to increase learning. Well, Lynette, I was just so excited to get to this example, so let's get to it because I want to see, this is kind of our question and answer period. We're going to interact with you, and we want to really examine a lesson that's kind of common in SRA in different ways. I've seen this in different relationship curriculum, different SRA curricula, and it's a lesson kind of like this. Students are asked to create two separate lists that prioritize characteristics of an unhealthy relationship and a healthy relationship. So there might be two large sheets of paper, and they're just creating from memory a list of characteristics of unhealthy and healthy. Then they're asked to compare and contrast. Compare this list to this list and compare the unhealthy to the healthy. Sometimes they're asked to put in things that you might do after commitment, things you might do at the beginning of a relationship, and so they're asked to create lists and then compare and contrast. And then, Lynette, finally, they're asked to judge these two lists for personal value. Which one of these would you want? And so let's use Bloom's. We could go to the next slide.
Yep.
And evaluate. What is the learning level of this activity? So quickly in the chat box, just think about it. What is the level of learning of that particular activity? They're creating, comparing and contrasting, and then evaluating. High or low? Marianne, what are we getting?
All right, so you ask a lot of questions. So, and the comment here, so if you can share with me, I'll just start talking to you about what's in the chat. All right, so the development of intentional activities based on different learning styles of the student to learn content being taught, instructional design, how you teach, curriculum, what you teach. Curriculum design is the content to be delivered. Instructional design is the way you teach the curriculum, which is the information you teach. Curriculum designs equal what you say, instructional, how you say it. Knowing your audience and their needs, curriculum design is why, instructional design is how. Instructional design is how you plan to teach or present material to your participants or students, and curriculum is what you plan to teach. So we have a lot of that. Information is provided in a relational way. Curriculum is what learning is the what of learning, and the how of learning is the instructional. Okay, so those are a few of them that have come in. Do you want me to continue on that, or would you like to comment? Looks like people have
I think that's great.
Postulated it.
Lynette, you're a principal. I would give them an A. Would you give them an A?
It's awesome. Awesome.
Right. So now let's go back to this lesson. We're talking about unhealthy and healthy. They're creating a list. They're prioritizing, comparing, contrasting, and then judging the value of it. So now in the chat box, let's drop in, what is the level of learning? Take a look here at Bloom's, and what is the level of learning of that activity? If you're doing that activity with the youth, is it a high level or a low level on the hierarchy? You could also look at your handout and see, where is create? Okay. This is a very high level. We're asking students to create a list. This is very, very high level. And some students may be able to do that. They may not be able to do that. When we ask them to compare and contrast the list, that's not as high. But then when we ask them to make a decision about those two, relationships, that's very high level. And to ask them to evaluate is very high level. And remember, if you don't have a schema for that and they don't know anything about that, you may need to take time to wind back down the road and take that lesson back to a lower level of learning. In this situation, some facilitators get frustrated that they don't understand, and the default is to go to a personal story and tell a personal story to help them understand the difference between two relationships. And again, you're asking them to evaluate your story in a context they may not have context for. That was your aha moment. It might not be theirs. And you're still not giving them what they need in order to make that decision. So don't move too fast. Take your time and assess the level of learning. There might be twists and turns as you get them to that point at the highest level of learning of making decisions. Okay, moving it down to a lower level. Your lesson plans could account for this. In your lesson plans, your instructional design, you could have it worked in that what do I do if they don't understand? What if they can't create a list? And so I've got a couple of ideas here, and Lynette, I know you've got a couple of ideas, and Marianne, if you'd watch the chat box, we'll ask some folks to think of some ways that we could adapt this lesson. So we have these two relationships represented here, a healthy and an unhealthy, and the students aren't getting it. We're asking them to put down things they should be doing at the beginning of the relationship, things they should be doing after commitment, as it's growing. They're not getting it. What's something we can do? What's a scaffold? What's a tool in our toolbox we could have that would help those students be able to create that list? What kind of ideas do you have?
While people are thinking on the last question about the high and low learning, everybody got an A. Everybody said higher.
Awesome. We are great teachers and great learners. We have the best class, Lynette.
Yeah, no, it's so, I think it just emphasizes the importance of using this handout as a guide, because, you know, sometimes we kind of think about it like, okay, yeah, this should be pretty easy, right? Because again, that's based on our schema. That's based on our experiences and what we know. But it's not until we then realize, as we're working with various populations, it's like our experience is not everyone's experience. And so using that as a tool, I think is going to be very helpful.
Okay,
here's
so we have one response in the chat box regarding this particular application question. Ask students to brainstorm what are the differences between different stages of a relationship.
Kat, that's great. That's capacity building, and that's a great strategy. Oh, I love this one, providing definitions for each step. And here's the tip I was going to give, and Lynette, I know you have one. One of the tools that would be good to have in your toolbox are some index cards that are on the ready. These are index cards that you've prepared ahead of time. You wrote down definitions, you've written down scenarios. If you don't have index cards, you could put a word bank on the board, but just providing those definitions for them ahead of time. And remember, not all learners are auditory, so just saying it out may not be enough. Maybe they need the card. And so if you create index cards to put the definitions or scenarios on, that's very helpful. Lynette, can you think of a way that this could be adapted, a strategy like that?
Yeah, I think along the lines in terms of the definitions, you know, we might be using certain terminology that may not connect with the learner. And so even just getting them, for example, if it is goals, you know, and it's kind of like goals, like what is it? It's like, okay, what was the hope for you when you got out of bed this morning? You know, what's a hope for you between now and the time that you finish school, right? And kind of then being able to take it from their understanding of it to then be able to then connect their understanding, again, their schema with the content that you're presenting, I think is important. There was once a lesson I was teaching about story mapping, M-A-P-P-I-N-G, story maps. and activating prior knowledge. One of my learners said, I was like, so who can tell me like what a story map is? And she was like, it's something you tumble on. No, that would be a mat, right? But if I continued on with that lesson, you know, she would just be like, what does this have to do with like tumbling, right? So it is just important, to the extent that we can, reach in and kind of see what their schema is so that we can better connect them, kind of serve as the bridge between what they know and also the content that we're trying to deliver.
We have an interesting comment here. Beth says, we use a wisdom bucket with props from each day prior. Sometimes we can take out an object to remind students what we've already taught them to build up to the answer that we're looking for.
I love it. That's
awesome.
Great. There's another, I do it, we do it. That's capacity building. So those are fantastic adaptations. The point of this is just to think about the wisdom bucket, index cards, sticky notes, just to provide scaffolding, those very things that will prompt them back to the place of definition. It might also prompt you to realize you didn't really cover the definitions, or they didn't really understand those definitions. And so maybe each day it's just going back and providing definitions in a review, having a review time before you enter into the lesson. All right, so any questions that anybody has? We have just 5 minutes left that we could take some questions if anybody has a question for Lynette or myself, or anything you just want to share with others about this topic.
While people are thinking about their questions, I was wondering if you, either one of you, could give kind of a simple definition of pedagogy.
Strategies for teaching?
I would just imagine it's sort of your belief or your understanding of how you know, you can promote learning for those in which you interact with. So again, knowing that like all learners, you know, we're unique beings, and so the strategies perhaps that might work for me and the students that I'm working with may not necessarily be the same for the students Connie's working with. And so pedagogy is kind of like your belief, your understanding, one of your learners, and then actually what you are able to do to then further promote learning through whatever strategies or techniques that best meets their needs.
And
philosophy meets method, kind of what you want to achieve, whether it's experiential learning, inquiry-based learning, whatever that looks like. Your philosophy meets your methods of delivering the instruction to the youth.
Someone's asking here, what program do you use to present this wonderful information? I'm not sure if they're talking about what curriculum, or I don't know what, and that's all the question is. Perhaps they are. Gregory, if you can let us know if you're asking about curriculum or something different.
If Greg is in fact talking about the information we presented here, again, this will be on the exchange. And then also if they had additional questions around this type of adaptation, then a TA request. At Public Strategies, we provide individual TA. I've actually worked with this with a few grantees, so you could talk to your project officer about TA and open a TA request, and we can talk about how to, this type of strategy and kind of get individualized with your team.
That's great. Gregory did respond that it was regarding this particular presentation. Mm-hmm.
Marianne, I'm interrupting you because I just have a very exciting thought that I want to tag on here. We've talked a lot about bringing the lesson down a level. You can also take the level up. I've been in classrooms where they're just, if I could use this language, killing it. Like they know it all. They could be teaching the class. And so how do I take that group and move them all the way to the top? Maybe it's asking them for decisions. Maybe it is asking them to evaluate and judge or create a story, or can you create a play and act this out, or create scenarios, or what are some of the things that they can do to create and move it and extend it, or maybe then you have them teach that to someone else, or peer mentoring. So this is not just about taking them down a level of learning if they need the scaffolding, but it's also taking them up a level of learning if they need it to be extended, and you can stretch them further. You always want to stretch them further towards optimal health.
We only have one minute left, so I wanted to pass on this very good compliment. This concept of schemas is super, super helpful. I feel better able to approach those situations when I say something and I just get blank stares from students, and troubleshoot lesson plans accordingly. So it looks like you ladies have successfully achieved your mission here in helping to build the scaffolding and the schemas, and understanding the pedagogy and instructional design and curriculum design differences. So,
and Kat, that's really important, because sometimes the blank stares lead us to go rogue and get off of the curriculum, lose the fidelity, and possibly lose the student. So that's great. And we hope that you can use these words to further your study. Looks like somebody wants to see the diagram about the relationship.
Yeah, that's why I went back to that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we are actually officially out of time for this session. So we'll repeat that these will be on the exchange and you can access these slides. So sorry, Adriana, that we did not get to do that slide. Okay. And that will end it. Please remember, we really need your participation in filling out the feedback form. We want a lot more people to be telling us what they liked, what they think we can improve and do better on. So if you'll make sure you fill those feedback forms out. And we thank our very knowledgeable presenters today for just getting us better at what we do. Thank you, ladies.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Ann, and thank you to our presenters. We will see you shortly for our final session of day 2, which is a joint session, which will be presented by Scott Roby. We'll see you shortly. Thank you.